Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Alright guys, hopefully you knew this was coming, and I am now continuing in my Christmas movie reviews. My last review coming up next is going to be 1987's Lethal Weapon, but this movie came out in 1988 and is directed by John Mctiernan, and that is Die Hard. Honestly guys, this movie could not have come out at a better time. Following out the success of Lethal Weapon, which is one of the greatest action movies of all time, Die Hard had a lot of shoes to fill, and it did in every single way, as it created just a new league and branch of how to do action movies, and of course, how to do them right. This movie is, for most people, arguably, the greatest action movie of all time, my father included, and most people include it in their top 10 favorite films of all time. Now, is it my top 10 favorites? No. But Die Hard truly is a great movie, and it is just so entertaining to watch. Such a fantastically well-made, well-shot, and well-executed action thrill ride. Before I get in-depth with my review, I'd just like to talk about what Die Hard really did. Die Hard sprung an entire generation that still goes on today of movies that can be considered Die Hard this, and that. Speed is technically Die Hard on a bus. Executive Decision is arguably Die Hard on a plane. Non-Stop is Die Hard on a plane. Passion 57 is Die Hard on a plane. See where I'm going with this? Die Hard just took the action genre and just made it into something new, different, and exciting. Now, I'm going to address why that was the issue for me when I first watched the movie at the end of this review, but I would of course like to talk about everything else, which is, of course, positive. So, of course, in the beginning of the film, we are introduced to the greatest police officer of all time, at least by my standards, John Mcclane, played just so brilliantly by Bruce Willis. And I love how the guy tries to make his experience infused with what he's saying. He says, I've been doing it for 9 years. And then he sees John McClane's gun, he looks down at him and he says, I'm a cop. I've been doing this for 11 years. Perfect introduction to his character. We know that he's serious but can make the wisecracks almost instantly. Now, I've talked about John McClane's charismatic side as well as Bruce Willis's because he's the guy playing him, but let's try to focus on why he's there. The thing that I found interesting rewatching this movie is that he's not there to fight terrorists. They just happen to show up and he's their only hope. John Mcclane is there because he's a flawed man who's trying to get back with his wife. He's so estranged from his wife because his home is 3,000 miles away in New York City. And he had an argument with his wife, and his wife ended up leaving, and she had a great job, which turned into a great career. And he's a flawed man because he lost his family in the process, and he's going to do whatever he can to get him back. That's what his character is doing in Los Angeles. What I love is that he's not there to just blow stuff up like Schwarzenegger or Stallone. He's actually a person, someone you can care about, and oh my God, can you care about this character? So, of course, the plot of Die Hard is very simple and straightforward. There's some terrorists who come into the Nakatomi Plaza who want the $600 million in bearer bonds embedded in this large safe, which takes 7 precise codes to crack, and John Mcclane, of course, is the only hope and has to stop them. That's the plot of Die Hard. It's very simple and straightforward. It created a franchise that sadly is now dead with this mess. But what it also did so successfully was create and craft brilliant villains. And we're going to talk about Alan Rickman in a second because that man needs an entire clip to explain his brilliance. The introduction to the terrorists is unbelievably amazing. It's perfect. I love the setup. 2 of them just come in, one of them shoots him, and the other one is a technician who systematically controls the elevators, closes all the gates, and just stops all the escalators. I mean, they systematically work perfectly. Another thing that makes Die Hard just one of the greats is that it feels very realistic for that period. Because that could happen at any point. It really could have happened at any point during the 80s or the 90s with no camera setups. You could have had terrorists come into your building and take you hostage and nobody would really know. That's the significance and terror of why they're terrorists. So as we all know, John Mcclane is up against the 13 terrorists, and the leader is Hans Gruber, played by Alan Rickman. There's a lot I can say about this character, but oh my god, he knocks it out of the park in this movie. He is so perfect as Hans Gruber. Just the perfect villain for an action movie. To be honest, I believe he set the standard for villains. And I think that the villain that beat him was his older brother, Simon Gruber from Die Hard 3. And when I talk about Die Hard 3, I'm going to explain why I think that's the case. But for this movie, you could not have had a more perfect villain. But what's so great about John Mcclane is that he can variously sneak around vents, but he maintains the fact that he's not an invincible superhero like he is in the last two Die Hard movies. This guy can get hurt, he runs away almost all the time, and he fears for his life and the Nakatomi prisoners' lives. Someone who you can obviously root for the entire time. And then of course we're introduced to Sergeant Al Powell, played by Reginald Johnson, whom I think is just perfect in this role. The introduction to his character is just astounding in every way because you can understand exactly who he is. He's this nice guy who's got a pregnant wife and he loves Twinkies. You just get all of those characteristics in one scene. It's like 45 seconds long. But what I liked even more about his character was him believing in John Mcclane, who knows that this person who he's talking to is a cop. He could figure that out almost immediately. But as I was saying before, as John is meticulously taking out a lot of the terrorists, I love his first introduction to Hans as well as Powell because they're both done in the same way. He's talking to him on the radio. With both introductions to our main villain and his help throughout the rest of the movie, they're both done by radios. So with his first encounter with them, he doesn't really see them. But what I liked even more with Powell is that throughout the entirety of his scenes talking to John Mcclane, he has no idea what he looks like, and John Mcclane doesn't know what he looks like. However, at the end of the film, when they go to see each other, they knew instantly who they were. But let's get back to John talking to Hans Gruber for the first time because it's just perfect. The scene and everything that's going on around him as he's trying to go through the terrorists, he ends up finding the cigarettes, and I just love the fact that he tries to talk to him about these old heroic characters because John Mcclane is like an old-fashioned cowboy cop. However, this scene ends with, of course, one of the greatest lines in cinematic history.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
It could possibly be the most badass action movie line of all time. I honestly think it is. I think it just takes everything about John Mcclane and makes him just like 50,000% more of a badass, and it's perfect. But you gotta love Alan Rickman in this scene as well as any and every other scene in this movie. This guy was a breakthrough actor. This was like his first big feature film, and he knocked it out of the park in this movie. It's like, imagine if his performance was not good. He probably wouldn't be as famous as he is today and have made those epic roles just as epic as they could be. So of course, I love the scene where John first meets Hans. It's so perfectly crafted, and I love the way that Hans just tries to act like an American and one of the hostages. But what's cool is that he's a Brit playing a German who then tries to forge an American accent, which is just brilliant. Alan Rickman, in every scene, just does a brilliant job, as I just stated before. The introduction to the SWAT team, the police RV. Hey, the police got themselves an RV. And then, of course, the introduction to the FBI, which agents Johnson and Johnson. The film never truly lets up because the dialogue just keeps it in suspense and sustained when the action isn't present on screen. But if there's just one thing that this movie had to nail, was to create a more personal connection between John and Powell, is present when he goes into the bathroom to clear out all the glass from his foot, and Powell reveals to him that he shot a kid, and that was the reason why he wasn't sure if he wanted to still be a cop and or still use his gun ever, because he was just a kid with this little ray gun. He thought it was real, so he ended up shooting him. And it's very sad, and it makes the character of Powell so much better because we can actually feel for him emotionally. So of course John finds out that the roof is just wired with C4 and their plan is to kill the hostage and get away, only to be stopped by Carol before he can finish his sentence, and a fight ensues that is just so brutal. They just duke it out completely. This is a fight that literally could have been so bad today. It could have been choreographed to all hell. But in this fight, it's like watching a regular fight. two guys trying to beat the living crap out of each other because you are just so into this entire scene. Your palms sweat. With every Die Hard movie, we see a brutal and realistic fight ensue with blood and just so much violence, but it feels so grounded. With Die Hard 4, they tried to defy physics a lot more and to try to make the fights more light-hearted than the other ones because it's PG-13. And then, of course, comes one of the most famous and possibly the greatest movie explosion of all time, as John Mctiernan jumps off the roof just as it's about to explode with all the fiery glory. It is perfect. It's a 10. That explosion is just so perfect. And literally almost every single action movie after that tried to copy a scene like that. So now, of course, John Mctiernan comes down to the last two villains. And the scene where he just plays with Hans is just so perfect.
What was it you said to me before? Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
John shoots him, and then he shoots the other guy. And then, of course, just one of the most brilliant on-screen deaths ever conceived happens in this moment. As his watch is collected to Holly's, and he just ends up disbanding the watch. And then we just watch Alan Rickman falling down in slow motion. And the look on his face of pure shock and realism is captured perfectly in that shot. It is just one of the greatest deaths of all time, and I've watched that scene 500 times at least. And it's just so good. It never gets old. So yay, everything ends happy, and oh wow, Carol's still alive? Powell, shoot him quickly! I love the fact that we don't know who shoots Carol at first, and then our camera just pans from the gun and then just makes Powell's face clear. And I know I didn't talk about Richard Thornburg, but man, that guy, what an ass. And then of course Holly punches him and it's just perfect. But that's all I'm going to say about Thornburg. When I talk about Die Hard 2, I will definitely mention him because he has a much bigger role. So our film of course ends with Argyle taking them away in the limo. And alright guys, that was Die Hard. And to be honest, I love this movie. Die Hard, I mean, what more is there to really say about Die Hard that hasn't already been said? It's an action movie that literally created criteria that is utilized in nearly every other action movie from it. And even though you guys know what I'm going to give Die Hard, at least I'm hoping you are, let me just state my two little problems with the movie. One is that this movie, it is somewhat brainless in a lot of scenes. However, it does set up a lot of things, and we have to be thankful for that, but this movie is very mindless at times. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of shootouts and gun violence, but you have to understand, and I have to understand, that at that time, it was so revolutionary and new. And I watched a lot of movies that were based on it before I watched Die Hard. Being in someone's shoes where they're this young, because I'm pretty sure I was like 13 when I saw Die Hard for the first time. If I was 13 back then seeing Die Hard for the first time, it would be so much more resonating for me because that was the movie that started it all. So watching Die Hard, I don't have the same type of emotional resonance that my father does because at that time it was so big and new. And I would say that my other problem with the movie is that I don't think it's perfect. That's what I mean. Like, I don't think it's absolutely perfect. And the reason why I say that, and I don't want to get a lot of flack for this, even though I'm still, you know what I'm going to give it, is that this movie takes place in one enclosed space, just in a building. And I know that creates a lot of claustrophobia. But what I love about Die Hard 3 even more, because that's my personal favorite, is that it takes place in New York. You have this wide open array that's just full of terrorism just encircling all of it. Whereas in this movie, it just takes place in an office building. It doesn't seem that much fun. And with Die Hard 2, even though I think that's an inferior sequel, it takes place in an airport. So you can honestly think to yourself that Die Hard 2 sounds like more of like a more fun movie than Die Hard 1. Even though Die Hard 1 is the better movie, Die Hard truly is one of the best action movies of all time. And it's definitely among everyone's top 10 favorite action movies, even top 5. It's set up and created criteria that's still used today, but no other movie has really ever captured the wonderment and the true action, gritty feel that Die Hard does. So guys, I of course have to give Die Hard an A+. Now, as I stated before, this is my second favorite Die Hard movie, my favorite being Die Hard with a Vengeance, and that probably being the most underrated movie of all time for me personally. But guys, what do you think about Die Hard? Do you like it? Do you hate it, even though I don't know how that's possible? Are you somewhere in the middle? Well, I would love to hear your comments. Just put them in the comment section below. I thank each and every one of you for watching my videos. And if you guys could recommend this to any and everyone you can, so much appreciation, so much love for you guys. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned.